Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning into our virtual program with Artist Geo Neptune today. I'm Sabrina Lin. I'm the curatorial assistant and manager of student programs at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. I've had the huge pleasure and privilege of working with our student curators from the Native American Students Association. Two of them are here today. We're sorry that the third one, Sunshine, can't be with us right now, but we're thinking of her. But I'm very happy to be joined by Amanda Cassano and Shandiin Largo today. Amanda is Bowdoin College class of 2022. She is an Asian Studies and Econ major, and Shandiin is a Russian and Hispanic Studies double major. So we're going to start the program. Amanda's going to offer a few words of introduction, and then we'll turn the floor to Geo, and then followed by a short Q&A after. So if you have any questions, please take advantage of the Q&A function on Zoom, and we're so looking forward to hearing more from Geo today. Thank you so much. Amanda, take it away.
Thank you. I look forward to introducing Geo Neptune today. So Geo Neptune is a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe from Indian Township, Maine, and a master basket maker, drag queen, activist, educator, and two-spirit, an Indigenous cultural, spiritual, and gender role that holds the sacred space between masculine and feminine energies. Learning primarily under their grandmother, Molly Neptune Parker, Neptune has been weaving since they were 4 years old. At 11 years old, they began teaching with the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, and at 20 became the youngest person to receive the title Master Basket Maker. After graduating from Dartmouth College in 2010, they returned home and began developing their individual artistic style of whimsical and historically informed basketry and woven jewelry. With their grandmother's influence clearly visible in their work, Neptune shows the closeness that the two shared and the lifelong education they received through her teachings. Molly Neptune Parker made her journey to be with the ancestors in June of 2020. They have worked not only within Wabanaki communities toward cultural preservation, but also statewide within Maine schools to provide content for the state's Indigenous history educational mandate. Their activism has enabled them to travel the world to share about the contemporary issues faced by Indigenous peoples. Neptune's work narrates the journey toward embracing the sacred role of the two-spirit, a keeper of tradition and teacher of Passamaquoddy and other Wabanaki youth. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Shandiin, who will be presenting a land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Amanda. My name is Shandiin Largo, and I'm a co-leader of NASA, or the Native American Students Association. And on behalf of NASA, we will be reading a land acknowledgement. We would like to respectfully acknowledge Bowdoin College resides upon the traditional homelands of the Abenaki people. The Abenaki people are members of the Wabanaki Confederacy, or People of the Dawn, which include 5 member nations: the Abenaki, Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. This was a site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for the Wabanaki over more than 12,000 years. Today, each community maintains its own tribal government, community schools, cultural center, and manages its respective lands and natural resources. Although most of Maine's Native people belong to one of these 5 federally recognized groups and reside on tribal lands, other Native people live in towns and cities across the state. We make this acknowledgement aware of violations of water, territorial rights, and sacred sites across Wabanaki homelands, which are stewarded today by over 7,800 tribal members of the state of Maine and counting. Indigenous peoples continue to protect and maintain their relationship with the land and waters, and will do so until the end of time. It is vital to honor these beginnings and recognize the ongoing dedication and importance of Indigenous culture within our communities and within the spaces that we gather, live, learn, and work on. Thank you all for joining us today and acknowledging the stewardship of the Abenaki people. Thank you.
Kwekwe, Ndaliwas Niskabizwin, Wabikuku Kazwak Bamuk, Najia Medakmiguk, Naga Ajibilita Hazieli Peskanmuka, Naga Niziniwasquano. Good evening, everyone. My name is Geo Neptune. I am from the Snowy Owl clan of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Medakmiguk, or now referred to as Indian Township. As you've heard in my bio, I am a two-spirit. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also non-binary. And thank you again for everybody, to everybody for joining me tonight, for joining all of us here. I know the plan was for us to be able to meet in person on campus and have more of an opportunity to talk to each other. But things, as I often do in the past few years, have to take a change of plans. So I'm broadcasting to you all live from my basket room instead, my workroom. So hopefully this will be just as good of a presentation, even if I can't be there in person. So I have a few different presentation formats that I go through, a few different kinds of presentations depending on what I'm being asked to talk about, but I often find that a lot of these things are really interconnected for me as a person and as an artist, and I don't really see how I'm able to separate those things from one another. So this presentation really doesn't try to. I try to touch a little bit on everything that I do. And hopefully this will be able to give a good idea of my work and some of the things that I'm hoping to accomplish in the future. So, especially if anybody has had a chance to watch Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness on Netflix, and if you don't have the chance, I encourage you to go and do so. I was featured in episode 3 of this new Netflix show, which was titled "Can We Say Bye Bye to the Binary," and was focused on the history of the gender binary and where it came from, and got the perspective of myself and several other activists. And I talk about how, in my role as a storyteller, in my role in ceremony, not only learning the Wabanaki creation stories, but through telling the Wabanaki creation stories, I received other parts of it that were missing. And parts of that were missing were, the creation of the first two-spirit. And in the Wabanaki creation story, Gluskub uses his arrow and fires it at the brown ash tree and splits the tree in half, and therefore splitting the spirit that resides inside the tree in half as well. And so when that spirit was split in half, he asked the spirit if those spirits wanted to make a trade. He said, "I will give you the breath of life, and I'll turn you into a Bamosawin, one who walks on the surface. If you make the agreement that you will be stewards of this place, you will be stewards of the land and the water, and take care of those resources, and teach your children to do the same, and take care of all of the other animals that live here with you." And so when those two spirits agreed to be the stewards here, to be the stewards of this land, Gluskub used the breath of life, and he gave them life. And from one half of the tree came the first Wabanaki woman, and from the other half of the tree came the first Wabanaki man. And they stepped out from the tree side by side. So in part of that teaching, it teaches that everybody's soul has a counterpart. Everybody's soul has a matching piece that we're constantly looking for, and we're constantly looking for those partners. And part of the story that I received and added to my chain of this story, my chain of this storytelling, the vision I received was that as men and women came out from either side of the tree, because that spirit of the tree was originally so powerful, as those spirits started to dwindle, like it started to be smaller beings. They came out as children, boys and girls coming out of either side of the tree. And then finally, there was not enough spirit left in either half of the tree to create another man or another woman. So Gelwazid took both of those energies and recombined them back into one spirit, because it was just enough to make one spirit altogether. And so the first two spirit came out of the Wabanaki, or came out of the ash tree at the end of all of those Wabanaki people, at the very end of the line, because it was our responsibility, you know, to remind everybody that they were always looking for their other halves, and also to remind all Wabanaki people where we came from, because our position between the rest of our people and where we were going and where we came from is what, you know, connects us to those origins, our ability to look back and remember where we came from, and to remind everybody who's ahead of us where it is that we've been, and where that connection is that we've lost. So one question that I frequently get is, you know, what exactly is a two-spirit? And it becomes difficult because it's not a one-word answer, and so many historians throughout, particularly white anthropologists throughout history, have tried to define it into one answer. They've tried to turn it into just gay males, just transgender women, just this, just that, and they separate out all of these other really integral parts of being two-spirit that are really necessary if you're going to fully understand what this role of a two-spirit actually is within Indigenous societies. So two-spirit is a name that is, it was originally decided upon at the Native American Gays and Lesbians Conference in Manitoba, Canada in 1990. And it comes directly from the Anishinaabe language, and it comes from the term Mijiminduok, literally two spirits. So with our language being so similar to Anishinaabe, in Passamaquoddy it would be a masculine version would be Niziminduok, and then the feminine version of two spirit would be Niziniwesquanuk. Niziniwesk would be the version, the feminine version. So this represented what many people described as a third gender that was found in many different Indigenous tribes all across North America, all across Turtle Island, and even into South America. And there are many other traditions that have this gender role that occupies the space in the middle, that is present in a lot of Indigenous societies. So to kind of boil it down, the Indian Health Services identifies 4 common traits among two-spirit traditions among all of these indigenous cultures. So one is specialized work roles. So there were very special work roles within their societies. Like they didn't necessarily do just men's work or just women's work. We often would do both or neither, doing things all together. So it would be very catered to something like, no, that is very much the two-spirit's job to do within our society. The second thing was gender variation. So not necessarily specifically trans, as in we think of it in a modern context of transitioning from male to female, but much more of an acceptance of each person as they are, and acceptance of their, what we would describe a transition and gender presentation as it is and as it comes. So there is the gender variation that is outside of the traditional binary of male and female. The third aspect is a spiritual sanction, is specifically that two-spirit people played important spiritual roles within our societies and within our ceremonies. And finally, the fourth overlapping aspect was same-sex relations, which is where a lot of the correlations between being two-spirit and being LGBTQ in general have overlapped. So there are many people who are Indigenous and use the term two-spirits, and are reclaiming that term for themselves. And there are also many Indigenous people who prefer to use the term indigiqueer because of these spiritual sanctions and these societal roles are not necessarily something that they feel appropriate claiming. So they decide to just use the term indigiqueer as well. So while being LGBTQ and being two-spirit are highly intersectional, they are not necessarily interchangeable terms. And people often will just boil it down to like, oh, two-spirit is just, the native way of saying gay or the way of saying lesbian or bisexual. or transgender, and that's not quite as simple as that. So a big part of the colonization process was focused on disempowering Indigenous women and removing Indigenous women in these matrilineal and matriarchal societies from their positions of power and from their positions of being on equal footing with men. And, you know, in order to create this idea of this masculine father god who is, you know, the master dominion over all things, and to convert people to these way of life, you know, they really had to have this conversion happen in order for colonization to be successful. So if you're going to not only disempower the women, but convince the men of the society to disempower them as well, you have to take out the person in the middle who has always been seen as the intermediary. A big part of colonization history was that how they determined whether or not a society was civilized was by whether or not that society had determined distinct differences between the sexes, whether those distinct differences were between their societal and cultural roles or literally down to the way they dressed and the way they looked. And when they discovered different societies that had you know, less of a division between the way men and women dress, less of a division between men and women in positions of power, they and especially finding people who were gender nonconforming in those societies, you know, they definitely saw it as, you know, a big threat to them, and used that as a way to promote that these people were uncivilized. So in order to create those divisions between men and women, they had to start, you know, creating that environment in which gender variance is criminalized, gender variance is frowned upon, and literally removing the two-spirit from the equation so that it's easier to get men to oppress these women and to start to adopt this colonial way of lifestyle. So when I went to my elders to ask about two spirits in general and to ask for stories and Wabanaki specific and even Passamaquoddy specific instances of two spirits, because in all of my research that I was able to access in my higher education, which I was very privileged to have, I wasn't able to find Wabanaki references. I'd only been able to hear it from Mi'kmaq elders in person, so that direct oral history, but not being able to find documented sources of it. So I asked one elder, and she had asked me, you know, I heard stories about them, two spirits, when I was a little girl, and we don't have those anymore. And this was before I had come out as non-binary, and also, you know, made that decision of myself to not only come out as non-binary, but I was doing it to honor myself, two spirit, to honor myself in that way. And even later that year, like, came that spiritual and ceremonial sanction in ceremony. But it was very hard for me to ask this elder for these teachings and to just be told, you know, like, you don't exist. And my grandmother, you know, when I had first come out in high school, well, I've come out so many times at this point, and I think that's something a lot of queer people can identify with. You know, I first came out as bi, I then came out as gay, and now I'm out as non-binary. I don't think I ever really came out as two-spirit, because that was something that was kind of always embraced, or at least talked about and looked at for me. But when I first came out, my grandmother said, I know the elders said they would be special and that they would help our people, but I didn't think they meant that they were two-spirited. Because my grandmother was not raised traditionally. She was raised very much Catholic. And one of the things that we were able to maintain was our language and some of our other cultural practices. But for the most part, many of our ceremonies, especially in my community, were more or less driven underground, and just kind of hidden and not very practiced openly, and certainly not practiced by anybody. So my grandmother did not get that traditional background growing up. She was raised as a Catholic, but the big difference, I think, was that one thing that our priests in our community did differently was that they made the effort to learn Passamaquoddy, because it was the only way they could get Passamaquoddy people to come to church. They would not. They weren't doing it, and they weren't doing it in English. And then when they finally started giving mass in Passamaquoddy, that's when it really took hold, and people started praying in the Catholic way. So I felt for a long time, especially as a youth, that I had to, like, in some ways, be my own elder. My elder, Deanna Francis, had passed away when I was a young adult, just after college. Um, and she was the only Two-Spirit Passamaquoddy elder that I really knew kind of embraced that role of the Two-Spirit, and knew the teachings of the Two-Spirit. Um, we definitely lost her way too early. So I felt there was a lot of, like, being my own elder for a long time, and having to find my elders, and finding them, um, within the greater Wabanaki Confederacy, ultimately going to Wolastoqey communities, going to Mi'kmaq communities, or at least going to ceremonies where there are Mi'kmaq elders, and being able to find these people that have these teachings. So a lot of it was relying on messages from my ancestors and from Creator to guide me. I was in a ceremony with elders at Nabizun when I got the message. It was my first time wearing a skirt to ceremony, and wearing a skirt publicly that wasn't a performance, that wasn't like me putting on a character and painting my face and or modeling or anything like that. It was just me dressing how I wanted to. Um, and so the elder, in the middle of one of our children's blessing ceremonies that I was helping with, stopped smudging the children and came and smudged me instead, and fanned me down. And after the ceremony, he gave me the message that the spirits and my ancestors wanted him to do that because they could sense the fear in my heart, and they didn't want me to live with fear in my heart, and they wanted me to let it go because my ancestors needed me and my people needed me, and my ancestors and my people love me. And the other message that they had was that the way I was dressed that day was how Creator wanted me to dress all the time, and that was my path, and that was my purpose to make sure that I'm walking that same path that Two-Spirit ancestors have walked, and making sure that other young Wabanaki Two-Spirits can find it and don't have to search for it as much as I did. Another message that I got I got in ceremony was from an elder, was that she said that I have this great, powerful rainbow that is with me all the time, this gorgeous, beautiful, bright and shining, like, rainbow light. And she said that I have to walk with it and not behind it. Because if I walk too much behind it and project too much of it in front of me, it becomes more of a force field, and it pushes people away. But if I'm able to embrace that rainbow fully and embrace that light and carry it with me, then it will actually draw people to me. It will draw people to me who will literally see how my medicine can help them in a good way, and not be affected by my medicine and what they interpret as a bad way. So that's been a big part of my path, is finding the path, and making sure that I mark it, so to speak. I mark the trail for future generations of Passamaquoddy and Wabanaki Two-Spirits. A big part of the reason why I do this work is that suicide is the leading cause of death in Indigenous youth ages 5 to 24, and LGBTQ youth are 5 times as likely to attempt suicide than heterosexual youth. And just growing up in Down East Maine with no queer representation other than what I could find quite literally on Maury and Jerry Springer. It was really important for me to be home and be in my community and, not perpetuate this idea that if you're going to be yourself and you're going to, live your own truth, you can't do it at home. You have to move away from home to do that. So ways that you can help, like really pretty directly, are using trans people and gender variant people's names, using their correct pronouns, correcting others when they dead name and misgender, normalizing the use of pronouns, and the use of introducing your pronouns, including gender variants in your company's policies, mission statements, etc. Voting makes a difference when you are voting in favor of or against policies. Teaching, listening, and most importantly, just believing trans people, believing gender nonconforming people about our experiences. Some further learning, if you want more resources about Two-Spirit people, that's The Zuni Man Woman by Will Roscoe is a book that I read when I was very young, in high school for the first time, and it really stuck with me. This Two-Spirit People is an anthology of Two-Spirit people's writings, as well as the book all the way on the left of the screen, Two-Spirit People by Sue Ellen Jacobs, Wesley Thomas, and Sabine Lang, is more of a history. So you have a history, an anthology, and a biographical piece. For anybody who is more interested in specifically Wabanaki Two-Spirit history, this book was recently published by Dr. Joseph Randolph Bowers and Elder Dr. Daniel N. Paul. Mi'kmaq Bo'onoth, Two-Spirit Medicine, Sexuality and Gender Variance, Spirituality and Culture. And when I found this book, like, this was very much like such a relief, because it meant that all of these elder Two-Spirits in Canada were already doing this work. We're already doing this work that I was hoping to one day go to Canada and be able to visit these communities and actually do. And a big part of what they talk about in the introduction to this book is that it is very much for future generations of Two-Spirits, so they don't have to search as hard. So being Two-Spirit in the 21st century, now you will see Two-Spirit included in the LGBTQ, or what we call the Alphabet Mafia acronym, LGBTQ+, LGBTQ 2S+. I think it should be in the front because we were here first, 2S LGBTQ. There are many people who disagree with 2S being included in that acronym altogether. It should be Two-Spirit and LGBTQ people, because they don't want to perpetuate the misconception that Two-Spirit and all of the other letters could be interchangeable with each other. That Two-Spirit is not just being LGBTQ and being Native, but Two-Spirit is an exclusive term in that way that it exclusively applies to Indigenous people, or North American Indigenous people, whereas many other cultures who have these very similar gender variances will have entirely different terms. So there are, there's the mahu in Hawaii. There are the fa'afafine in the Philippines. So they all have their own culturally specific terms, and most tribes do. But Two-Spirit comes from that kind of Eastern Algonquian language root. This is me and my gram, weaving on her kitchen table I had, I don't even know if I'd graduated from Dartmouth at that point. I think that was actually my freshman year at Dartmouth College. So we often wove together at her house. I wove with her. I had been weaving with her since I was 4 years old. Um, and she had been weaving with her mother and grandmother since she was 7 years old. Well, actually, her grandmother passed around the time when she was 7, but that's about the same time that she, picked up her first pieces of ash and started weaving together. So fancy baskets in Wabanaki culture were traditionally more of a women's craft, and men would make the heavier utility baskets that were load bearing and made with thicker pieces of ash, as well as preparing the ash logs themselves, and the women gathering the sweetgrass. Now the gender roles are virtually non-existent. They are not anywhere near as rigid. But even when I started making baskets, there were very few male basket weavers. There were Clara Keyser's sons, Rocky and Kenny, that were making fancy baskets, and most other male basket weavers were making utilitarian style baskets. But now this has very much changed. Fancy baskets are seen as more of a high art form at this point. They are seen as fine art. They're not just seen as a craft anymore, because so many of them are one of a kind pieces that don't necessarily get replicated. And even when we do have forms and shapes that repeat, none of them are truly the same. So baskets, thanks to artists such as Sarah Basin, such as Eric Bacon, such as Jeremy Frey, Teresa Secord, all of these artists who paved the way for other artists such as myself to start going to Santa Fe Indian Market and competing in those markets. Many of these basket makers actually, ended up having these divisions created in the juried competitions, because before their presence at the market, there were very few baskets being judged, if only from the Southwest. So now, fancy baskets are made by people of all genders, but I always saw my path with basket making and its connection to the women in my family very much as kind of a guiding, almost like blueprint to me being two-spirit, to me learning the women's traditions instead of the men's traditions, and staying inside and taking care of the children with my other eldest female cousins, instead of being out and doing the work in the yards like the male cousins were doing. It was like, I think even though my family didn't intentionally do it that way, I was very much living kind of in that role of the eldest daughter within an Indigenous family, but I was the eldest two-spirit instead. My grandmother and I often wove together, though she refused to teach me at first. I started asking her, she said I started asking her about the time I could talk. I really wanted to make baskets with her, and I would sit at her feet and take scraps out of her waste baskets and tie them together to make like little baskets, just like knotted pieces of ash. And I guess by the time I was 4 years old, I just got tired of her telling me no. I had to wait until I was older, because I went to the summer camp here on the reservation, the summer day camp, and I discovered that there was a basket class happening with my aunt Duzalin, who was an elder in the tribe. And I was in kindergarten at the time, or I was going into kindergarten, so it was before I'd even been to school. I talked my way into this basket class that was intended for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And when I was talking to the camp director, I was like, I really want to take this class. I really want to take this class. Auntie Dizlin said I could. It just had to be okay with you. And they were like, well, it might be really hard for you. Like, it's a basket class. It's going to be difficult. And I remember lying to them and being like, you don't think I can make a basket? My grandmother is Molly. I already know how. And apparently it worked, because I guess they thought I had a point, and they put me in the basket class. And the last thing I remember so clearly, was reaching for the sweetgrass. Like, I was finally allowed to touch the sweetgrass and not just you know, have my grandmother be like, no, you can't have any, no, you can't use that, that's good stuff, like you need to leave that alone. It was like, it's my turn to grab a bundle of sweetgrass. And then it just, like, you know, I was 4 years old, so the memory just kind of goes blank. But I made my first basket without my grandmother, and I brought it home to her, and she said normally I would come in off the school bus from summer camp and kind of, you know, announce that I was there, like all excited, like Graham, da 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 da. But that day, she said she heard the bus pull up, heard me come inside, heard the door shut, heard the bus pull away, heard my footsteps come into the living room, and I just made eye contact with her, and I walked in, and I set my first basket down on the table in front of her. And then I went outside and I played with my cousins. So she knew that that was me. And it kind of really set the tone for the rest of our relationship, that was me insisting that, yes, I was ready to make baskets. I was ready, and I proved it to her. So by that fall, we made our first basket together. And she always said it was one of the longest days and longest teaching experiences of her life, because no matter what she tried to do, if she tried to do anything for me, I would take it out. I would not let her weave any piece of my basket or take it from me and complete any part of it for me. I insisted that she show me how to do it. And at this point, I remember different stages of basket making, and I remember like learning how to do certain things that she had always had to complete for me. Especially with preparation, because I did the opposite, where as most people would learn to prepare the materials and then learn how to make baskets. I did the opposite. I learned how to make baskets and then learned how to prepare my materials. So I remember different stages of it, but overall, like, I don't actually remember learning how to make a basket. I don't remember sitting and learning how to do that. It's something that I've always known how to do in my mind from what I'm able to remember. So on the left is the first basket that I made without my grandmother, the one that I made in class. And there's that bundle of sweetgrass that I was able to reach for finally, to go on my handle. And then to the right is the first basket that I made with my grandmother. It was just a simple little red candy basket that we wove in her kitchen. She let me use the standers and the weavers from one of her batches that she was making a strawberry from. So I was very excited to have a fully red basket. And then we put this, you know, cute little white handle on it so that I had something to carry. And I remember distinctly thinking that it was too plain for me. It wasn't geo enough. And I remembered like waiting for my grandmother to go to the store, waiting for her to go to the bathroom, just waiting for her to like leave the room, because I knew she would stop me if she saw what I was going to do. So as soon as she was out of sight, I grabbed my Rose Art crayons. Well, they weren't my Rose Art crayons, because I didn't buy Rose Art crayons as a 5-year-old. I was very picky. I was Crayola only. She only had Rose Art crayons and refused to buy the Crayola because they were more expensive. But I had Rose Art at that time because they were what Graham had. So I took the Rose Art crayons and remember wishing they were Crayolas because it would stay better. But I took those crayons and I drew all of those designs that you see on the little white handle there. I wanted to draw a pattern. My grandmother had taught me about double curves, but I didn't know how to draw them yet. So the closest I got to making double curve designs was trying to remember the Lucky Charm shapes. So I got like hearts and stars. I think I did like a circle and a square. There might be a horseshoe on there somewhere. But that's where I went with that piece, and that was how I decided to make it, quote unquote, more geo. And she was so mad at me when she found that I'd done that to that basket. She said, I ruined my basket, and I thought it looked much better. And to the credit of the Rose Art crayons, they've stayed on very well. So on the left is my grandmother's signature strawberry. This strawberry came from her great grandmother. She inherited the mold from her and from her mother. Um, yeah, this particular strawberry shape has been woven by the women in my family for many years at this point. And this is, her shape and her mother's signature shape, her grandmother's signature shape, and now that shape has been passed on to me. So I have this mold and have made one fully red strawberry. Up until that point, I had only made strawberries that you see on the right, which are much smaller. They are about maybe 3 inches tall, and they are partially dipped in dye to reflect that idea that they're still ripening, like they're not ready yet. And I stuck with this image because my grandmother had joked at one point. She was like, don't go stealing my strawberries. I was like, I won't. I'll make mine a little different. So I always made mine always smaller and always unripe. And even when I did make a larger strawberry, I would make it all white, all with just plain ash. And I just kept that image going that I was the strawberry that was still growing, and that's why I made those. Like, those are my strawberries. I'm still growing. I'm still maturing as an artist and as a person. And when my grandmother passed her strawberry mold onto me after she passed, that's when I made my first strawberry. It was my turn to carry on that tradition and to ripen and become the fully grown, ready strawberry. This was my take on a traditional Wabanaki sewing kit. One of the first ways we adapted our baskets to sell to tourists, outside of just having them for ceremonial and trade purposes, was by making sewing kits to sell to the European American women. And we would also, women in the tribe would also use them as a way to make money for themselves. At one time, we had to report all of our earnings back to the Indian agent and give him all of our earnings, and then he would often pay himself out of his own pocket and say that we made less money than we actually did, because Indians in the state of Maine were deemed incompetent as a race of people and incapable of taking care of our own finances. Which is why we weren't allowed to vote in the state of Maine until 1969. But when Passamaquoddy women would go to the store, they would go and request their money, and they would have one of their sewing baskets, one of these sweetgrass flat baskets tucked under their arm. And they were like, well, what is that? They're like, well, it's just my purse. And so they would put the money in their purse. But also in the purse, in that sweetgrass purse, was a sewing kit. So on the way to the store, they would stop at all of the White Houses on the way to the supermarket, and they would knock on all of the doors and offer their sewing services. They would repair socks, repair hems on skirts, hem pants, sew on buttons, whatever they needed. And they would make money on the way to the store and on the way back from the store. And that way, should the Indian agent catch them, just close up their basket, and they were just sitting there visiting with their friend. They weren't doing anything. And then they would come back and they would show the receipt from the store and all of the groceries, and go back to their house with, and give him the change that was left over from what he gave them, and then go back to the house with all of the extra money that they made that day tucked into their sewing kit. Some more versions of my grandmother's berries, the strawberry, and then I have a kind of a blue raspberry and a black raspberry there, or a blackberry, and also one of my rainbow corns. Yeah, I remember wanting to make this rainbow corn and being so afraid of making it because I literally thought people would think that it was like too gay, or it was too bright and just too queer, and looked too much like a rainbow penis. But much to my surprise, I guess there's quite a market for rainbow penis baskets, because now I can't hold on to them. Yeah, and I lost sleep over this color of blue, by the way, getting this particular shade of blue. I had a dream or a nightmare where I was surrounded by vats of blue dye and just ripping up bundles of ash and just screaming like, "It's not blue enough!" And none of it was happening because I could not get the right shade to fit in the rainbow. Some of you might recognize this basket, especially coming up in one of your future exhibits. This is a Bikjilu Binds the Sun in one of my storytelling baskets, talking about how this not so mythological creature, a Bikjilu, kidnapped a sunbird and bound her wings so that she couldn't open them to release the sun every day. And Galuskab attempted to rescue the sunbird and couldn't entirely free her, so he could only get one wing unbound. So now she stands at the top of her mountain with one wing always extended and the other wing always closed. And she slowly turns on the top of her mountain so that half the world has daylight and the other half can sleep in the darkness. So these are two halves of the same basket that you can see, two sides of the same basket, and it changes as you walk around it. This is, I call this piece the Spirit Road. No, this wasn't Spirit Road. This was a Ceremony of the Singing Stars. That's what this was. And I made this piece as a remembrance piece a year after the Pulse Orlando massacre. And this is at the permanent collections of the Idle Drug Museum. And once again, this is the Nightmare Blue, as we'll come to call it. That beautiful, bright blue stripe in the midst of that indigo and that violet right next to the green. Took me a whole day to get just that color. This basket took 4 hours of math to figure out the pattern and figure out if it was going to work with all of the colors the way I wanted it to. About 44 hours of weaving. Yeah, there was a whole lot that went into this piece, and it's definitely one of my masterpieces. This piece was called Bilwabid, the Powerful One, and it was my version of a self-portrait. So I depicted myself in this traditional Wabanaki women's regalia and skirt, but the cap is one that is typically worn by men, and the only women that I've seen wearing that cap have been two spirit women. So women would have the single peak in Wabanaki culture, whereas men, particularly shamans in Passamaquoddy culture, would have the double peak. This is one of my more recent pieces. This is a 10-inch in diameter cedar bark flat. Again, based on those sweetgrass flats that were home to the sewing kits that I mentioned before. But instead of using braided sweetgrass, I used split eastern cedar bark. This is another one of my smaller creations, a miniature berry, even smaller than the previous one I showed. This one's only about 2 inches tall. So another part of my aspect of the art that I do is I've been a drag performer for several years, and had always wanted to get into modeling and photo shoots, and I've been able to do that. But this is from one of my very earliest photo shoots. You know, at the time, I had visions of me getting onto RuPaul's Drag Race and having all of these Indigenous fashions that I can wear down the runway. Because I had seen people mimicking Indigenous fashion and, you know, more or less putting on red face to go down the runway. And it was like that, you know, our fashion and our culture is so much more diverse and has so much more depth than that, than just, you know, fake ripped buckskin and cheap imitation turquoise jewelry. And there's so many fashion designers from all different nations that like could be showcased in that way. So that was like where I was going for the shoot, which was specifically for Native Peoples Magazine. And it started my journey of collecting Native fashion, of collecting work by Native designers and making sure that I'm ready for those fashion line drops and I'm able to get the things in my size. because it's not easy for a big girl to find stuff by designers. They often don't make stuff for us. So I had to work really hard to build this collection and find it. So this was one of my very first photo shoots. This was a second photo shoot that I did in the desert, again for Native Peoples Magazine. This is one of my first outfits, wearing a Bethany Yellowtail top and skirt. Another shot from that photo shoot, the Bethany Yellowtail top and skirt, medallion and hat band by DeConti and Brown, my ermine earrings by Indigenous Princess, and a beaded clutch piece, beaded clutch bag, fully beaded, entirely constructed out of beads, by Jennifer Page. This is one of my more recent drag looks. One of my, I'll call it a TikTok drag look. One of the looks that I created specifically just for making some videos in my bathroom at the beginning of the pandemic. I haven't made TikTok videos in a minute, and I really miss it. So I'm going to be getting back to it very soon, especially because I have a very nice new ring light and green screen. Another more recent drag look. I've really kind of embraced my bald queen potential. This is one of my more recent modeling shoots. So with my modeling shoots, I am also leaning more towards like not going for a full drag and not going for any kind of illusion photo shoot, but more embracing non-binary presentation as I see it, embracing two-spirit presentation as I see it. So this was for the announcement of the Out 100 that I did this shoot. And I'm wearing a coat by Jamie Okuma, and my jumper is actually made by me as I'm trying to get into fashion design and garment construction. And I made it from some scarves that were designed by Jamie Okuma as well. Another photo shoot that I did out at Plaza Blanca in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with my friend Angoba Davis. Another shot from that shoot. In this photo, I'm wearing a dress by Patricia Michaels and my earrings by Zincala Black Owl. Here I've got a sash by Patricia Michaels, a ring by Kristen Dorsey Designs, earrings by Neil Perkins Designs, and my pendant by Atombi Metals. And all of these pieces, I think especially as like my social media following grows, people think that maybe I'm just giving these pieces to do photo shoots and things with, and that's what I do. Like, no, not at all. This is something that I do in my own time, and these are designers that I buy from. I own all of this jewelry. I buy it, I trade for it, and then I work with my photographer friends to get some incredible shots. And I did it as a way, you know, because I'd never seen people like me modeling. I hadn't seen them on the fashion runways, especially in Santa Fe or in Phoenix for Indigenous designers. And I really wanted these Indigenous designers to like want to book me and want me to wear their things. And not just want me to go in full drag and wear them things. I wanted them to want me to wear them. I wanted them to want Geo to wear them, not my performance character. So I started wearing them. I started buying the things and I started photographing myself in them in different settings, and I'll be damned if it didn't work, because now I get booked for runways and walk for Jamie Okuma at Santa Fe Indian Market. So I am really thankful for my photographer friends, my fashion designer friends, especially the first fashion designer friends who ever put me on the runway, you know, DeConti and Brown, who you saw some of their work in earlier photos. Because it not only gave me a chance, it gave me the confidence to keep going, you know, like that idea, like, you know, somebody does want me to wear their garments. They do want to see me in their work. And so that is the end of my slides for you all today. If you need to reach out or you have questions, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok and Twitter, and that is my Gmail there.
Hey, I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. Let me see if we could. Gio, do you mind exiting share screen really quickly? Perfect. So I know Amanda and Shandiin had some questions prepared, but we're also anticipating questions from our audience. So Shandiin and Amanda, why don't you get us started?
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina. And thank you so much, Gio, for sharing so much valuable and powerful knowledge with us. I think it was very powerful and empowering for me, and I really thank you. One question that I got sent to me by a viewer asks about your endeavors and presence in art media, and is wondering if you're interested in expanding your creativity to designing or creating beyond that. For example, getting involved in furniture design or interiors, textiles, architecture, things like that.
I have definitely considered those things. I have a really creative mind, and like the gears are constantly turning, and I'm constantly trying to learn new things and do new things. And I always find that once I learn something, like I can do it. Like I can do almost anything with my hands. And those are areas that I would love to expand to one day. I just know that at this point, like I have to pick one area at a time. Like I'm just, I want to do so much, but I still just need to like make sure I get my dishes done first, and like maybe organize the kitchen a little bit. But I have so many things that I do want to go beyond with, and that I think I can have that potential too. Um, I just think there are some other steps that I have to complete first, and I think that maybe once I'm able to build that name for myself, and have like a real workshop, and not just the little spare bedroom in my house, like an actual space where I can get real large work done. That might start to change, because I do want to get into carving, um, larger pieces, construction. But I'm really dying to actually, get my toe in the door for fashion design. Um, but furniture, now I'm going to be sitting down and like sketching different furniture pieces later, instead of finishing all these earrings that I'm still behind on.
Thank you.
Gio, I'm wondering, well, first of all, thank you so much for your amazing words on your presentation. I'm curious, how is your relationship with mentoring apprentices and mentoring youth in basket making and other arts? Has that affected your own basket making? I'm just curious what your thoughts on that might be.
Um, well, with mentoring other youth, and it's been put at a bit of a halt with the pandemic. Myself and I guess it would be my apprentices, haven't been able to meet in about 2 years now. And we're hoping that's going to change with the acquisition of a physical space for us to meet, um, and with hopefully, things around the pandemic slowing down. Um, I don't know how much it's necessarily changed my work, other than the sense that it's almost like kind of a like I'm reinforcing myself by reinforcing my apprentices and supporting them, because I think that what a lot of Native people get trapped in as we become artists, or as we want to become artists, is we get trapped in this idea of what is Native art and what isn't. The other thing that I often get trapped in is like the difference between craft and art, and I'm not gonna go down that road right now. Um, or what people see as craft and what people see as art. But I really work hard to make sure that my kids know that whatever they make is Native art, because they are Native and they are making art. It doesn't matter if it's photography, it doesn't matter if it's painting, it doesn't matter if it's some new art form that nobody else around here has even tried to work on. What they make is Native art. You know, I tell them, like, my TikToks are Native art. Like, this is Native art because I'm Native and I made it, and it's art. So I think that that has been the biggest thing for me, because even my grandmother would always try to get me to focus on only baskets. Like, but you're so good at baskets. You're so, like, yes, I know, but I'm also good at all of these other things, and I'm also really want to explore all of these other things. So I think the biggest thing that my students give me is that backwards reinforcement that, you know, I'm telling them that they can do anything they want, and that applies to me too.
Thank you so much. Oh, yes. Yeah, did you see the questions?
I was just looking. I see them in the Q&A. Have you tried combining your baskets and your interest in clothing design? Yes, I have. Stay tuned. We'll get there. I don't want to reveal too much about that. But I have been secretly fashion designing for years. And it is hopefully, I'm hoping within the next year, it can be a little bit less of a secret and will be more obvious. And we have another one from Liz Armstrong. How do I do it all? ADHD. That's how I do it all. It makes it easy to bounce from one thing to other things. I don't know. I think it also taps into a lot of kind of Native views on neurodivergence and neurodivergent people's roles within our societies and how we contribute is we're able to learn quickly. We're able to remember things better than some people. We're able to move very quickly from one thing to another and not lose track of all of these different things. And, you know, I went undiagnosed with ADHD up until last year. And since learning that I'm neurodivergent and that I have this differently wired brain. My brain really does work differently than other people, and it's not just an overactive imagination. Yeah, that's how I do it all. That's my superpower. How did I maintain strength during the moments when I had to be my own elder? I think during those moments, that was when it was most important for me to be able to build and trust in my own personal relationship with Creator. I did definitely a lot of searching into other spiritualities and other systems of thought to try and find that connection, because I didn't have that connection with a lot of the ceremonial elders yet. But I just remembered that so much of Native spirituality was so much about your individualized system of speaking to spirit and talking to Creator and getting those messages from our ancestors. So when I didn't have those elders, when I had to be my own, I think that was what gave me that strength and really built the foundation for being able to keep listening and keep getting those messages. I even got, a little over a year ago, I got a message from a medium that said, you know, they were just like, hey, the spirits want you to know that they know you can hear them, but they don't understand why you pretend that you can't. And I was like, oh, okay. Because, you know, I went through this whole like spiritual reclaiming for myself, and then went through a period of time in my life where I just doubted it. And kind of thought that it wasn't going to be real, and it wasn't where I was supposed to be. And then I just got those reinforcing those reinforcing pats on the back later on, that was where I was supposed to be going the whole time. And sometimes we have to go the wrong way just to figure it out that it is the wrong way. But ultimately, no matter what path we choose is the right way, because it's the path that we chose. And it puts us through all of that, but definitely learn to develop your creation with your relationship with Creator and rely on that. I see a few more questions in the regular chat, I think. So I'll get to that one as well. And we have another one in the Q&A. What would be my ideal home studio? Andy, of course you're asking this question. My ideal home studio would be a little Amish cabin that's big enough for me and my students to be able to build a birch bark canoe in. Because that's the one thing holding me back from being able to really learn, is having that space to build one. Can't do it in my living room. Yeah, I love David's space. My cousin David had a big influence on me in visiting his little cabin. It was like, this is exactly what I need for baskets. So someday. The blue you used was very elegant and beautiful. Thank you so much for noticing the beauty of the nightmare blue. How have environmental issues impacted your practice? The fact that ash trees are now an endangered species. So we have been bracing ourselves for the impact of the emerald ash borer for many, many years at this point. And I think that the reason the emerald ash borer has slowed down is very much due to the efforts of Wabanaki and Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe basket weavers, because we were the only ones who cared about it. We were the only ones who cared about the ash trees. Other than cities who had their ash trees in the middle of the city dying, nobody was concerned. So I think that the environmental change is going to be even more impacted going forward. I know a lot of elders are talking about the difference in sweetgrass growing and the differences in where it's growing and how much it is growing. And a lot of us have to go farther and farther into the state, like farther and farther from the coast, to be able to even find our ash logs. But in terms of the environmental impact of like what basket makers would have, one, there aren't very many basket makers in the state. Two, the selection process for getting an ash log for basket making is so particular. You can't just use any tree. You have to find a tree that's the right size, the right length, no knots, no branches, no curves or bend to the tree. And then you have to make sure that the growth rings are nice before you even cut it down. So if we're looking at Maine's forests, I think our forests are, was it 12% ash trees? Or was it 20%? I feel like 20% is really high. I think we're at about 12% ash trees. And then of those ash trees, about 2% are brown ash trees. And of all brown ash trees, about 2% of those are usable for basket making, or are seen as perfect trees for basket making. So it's such a selective process that we aren't having the huge impact on the trees themselves, but if the emerald ash borer does take hold and really spread the way we've been dreading it will, then it will have a much greater impact, and it will make it even harder for us to find that really small percentage of trees that we can even use to begin with. So that's why you see so much hoarded basket ash and of course pool noodles, but ignore those. But there's all kinds of basket supplies back there, because my grandmother would never forgive me for throwing away usable materials.
I think we have just about time for one last question. I don't know if Shandiin or Amanda, you want to take advantage of this last opportunity, or anybody in our audience. would like to conclude with a question for tonight.
That's all right. Can I go ahead and ask a question? Geo, what are you looking forward to most this year?
I am, I'm kind of looking forward to just staying home this year. I've just got my artwork, my room set up, my work room, which is going to be, on one of the steps, really important steps on the way to getting my studio, and in getting that up and established. So I'm not doing the Herd Market this year. I'm not doing the Santa Fe Indian Market this year. I'm staying home. I'm catching up on my commissioned pieces that I'm so far behind on, and I'm preparing for my debut at the Renwick Gallery at the Smithsonian Museum of American Art next year. So I'm excited to just kind of focus on that and to do several earring and small basket drops on my website throughout the year, so people can keep an eye on my Instagram for when that is about to happen. Yeah, that's what I'm excited for, and I'm excited for all of the momentum that this year is going to bring me for next year.
I think that's a perfect note to end our time tonight. As hard as that can be, I think we're all just so grateful for your time, for your leadership, for your sharing of your story, your journeys. It's just been such a wonderful time, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us that we're looking forward to welcoming you back to Bowdoin, hopefully in the near future. In the meantime, I hope everybody in the audience will get the chance to come to the Bowdoin College Museum of Art and see Geo's amazing basket in person at our latest exhibition, Innovations and Resilience Across 3 Generations of Wabanaki Basket Making. The museum is open to the public 6 days a week, Tuesday through Sundays, and we hope to see you in person very soon. Thank you again, Geo. Thank you, Amanda and Shandiin. And thank you to everyone in our audience tonight. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.